So I thought we can just move on a bit and talk about home theaters. We've used a lot of terms that maybe you're certainly very familiar with and I know a bit about. But if we could explain the key elements that you typically, talking acoustics in a home theater that we come across.
Mm-hmm.
So some that I know commonly are diffusion, absorption, and bass traps. These are three you've talked about. So if you could talk about those, and then a question we get all the time that I'm going to throw to you also is, what is the ideal room size? And I know your answer, but if you can answer that, I think that might be helpful as well.
Right. So the ideal, there is really no such thing as a small room that has no problems whatsoever. There will always be, of course, it really depends on what you define as, that is, I'm honest, like when I'm desperate for music, I can listen to music out of a tin can. But assuming that we're not always in that situation, and now my kids are grown up, so now I have an inkling towards finer audio systems and all of that. So given that, the first thing to think about is how big the room is and how low you want to listen to. If you're so we have a questionnaire that we send out to all our clients before we sign on a project with them, where we ask them what is their use case. Are they using it most for gaming, or you have the whole spectrum? There's movies, there's gaming, there is just news and sports. There's even that.
So we do the same, but when we're choosing equipment, but how would that change? So I can answer how. So we say, certain speakers are more musical, certain speakers are more suited for home theater.
Precise.
So we recommend equipment based on that. But how would a client's answer change or impact the acoustic design of the space?
So if it's just sports and news, we would really just do 2 to 4 inches of treatment to take care of the mids and the lows, and to make sure that it's not reverberant, it's not sounding harsh, because there's going to be a lot of audience howling and hooting and cheering and all of that. So we just want to make sure that it's sounding, it's not harsh, So one of the things but then if they're watching a movie, we want the bass to be tight and all of that. If they're saying it's only a stereo setup just for listening to good music, then we go hammer and tongs. We need to everything. We give them good diffusion. So
this is a good point. So again, ask you. So if you can just talk a bit about what diffusion does versus absorption versus bass trapping.
Great. So we talk about porous absorption first. Absorption is essentially, so if you have a material such as a foam or polyfill or rock wool, what these things do is, when sound goes into these materials, anything with pores has a very large surface area of contact. So sound energy enters these pores and through frictional losses dissipates itself as minuscule amounts of heat. So essentially the best auditoria in the world, or the best concert halls, the best home theaters in the world, the best listening rooms in the world, they all use porous absorption to a certain extent to ensure that the reverberation time is brought down to ideal levels.
So what does that do for the listener? For me as a listener, how does absorption or bringing down reverberation time improve my listening experience?
Because it also colors the sound a lot. So the first thing is the separation between the words. Now in this room, the RT is close to 0.5 and you're able to make out my words separately, right? But if the reverberation time was 4 or 5 seconds, whatever I say would linger on in the air for that long.
It's almost like an echo.
It's like an echo. The echo would still be like a reflection of that sound. It's just how long sound lingers in the air. And it's all bouncing back from the surfaces. It doesn't have a place to go to. So what you're doing by providing porous absorption, now for instance, if you just had, if you're shifting houses, you move into an empty house, it's all echoing everywhere. But when you move in your pillows, bolsters, open windows, have coupled spaces, have volumes opening one into the other, all of that echo goes away. I have zero acoustical treatment in my house because I don't need it.
So by adding absorption, you're basically reducing the echo.
Yeah, so all of these pillows, bolsters are all porous absorption.
So I've seen a lot of, well, I shouldn't say a lot, but I have seen places where people have gone in and done only absorption. So what does that do, and why would you not do that?
So there is, of course, all this is very gray area, because how much is needed is always.
Of course, that's a science. So that's why I'm asking.
But the question
I've asked a sort of extreme question that in a room which says only absorption,
it sounds very dead. So that's not what we even do for studios. We don't want even studios to sound very dead. And I mean, I see a lot of this happening, especially in podcast studio setups, where people try and make the environment sound extremely dead, which is, it's also, along with sounding dead, sounds drab. That's so there's a very fine line between over treating a space so that it sounds so dead that I don't stay awake through a lot of the podcasts because of this. Also, it's age and everything, but still.
And my father told me, he said, because we don't live like, we always believe when we're designing home theaters or studio setups from an equipment perspective, you want to aim to recreate a live experience at home. And we don't live in a dead space, right? You're walking out, you're watching a movie where there's some scene in a mall. It's a loud, when we walk into a mall, it's a loud place with reflections. Or you listen to music in a concert hall, it's a loud place with reflections. So,
Yes. And it's so the thing is, you have to tread that fine balance between making a place sound too dead with over treating so this is something we see everywhere, the pet panels and so many other products which people just overuse, and they think that's all there is to home acoustics treatment, which is just using porous absorption. And so when you walk in, you see that one band of frequencies is fully absorbed, over absorbed. So when you over absorb so these porous absorptive treatments, typically 2 to 4 inches thick, all work on upwards of say 500, 1K. They don't do much below that. And so, if you imagine you're listening to a drummer and he's playing, he ends the song with one long on the crash, okay? If you overtreat the room, it's going to sound like
dead.
Yeah, where's the feels, So
what's the well, if not the opposite, but so is diffusion?
No, yeah. So using a lot of scattering elements is very important.
And is that what diffusion is?
Scattering sound. So you create offsets so that the phase of the sound is broken. When it goes and hits a wall, it's not all coming back to you at the same time. You want to avoid a perfect planar reflection. It should not come back in the same plane as it went and hit the wall. That's what you're trying to do.
And again, what does that do for me as a listener? By adding,
it gives you a feeling that you're in a larger space.
Right.
So this is one of the aspects. And the other thing is bass trapping. So for small rooms, bass trapping becomes the most important thing you do. We find that even in open, say corporate spaces, and you have like a cafeteria, you have chairs, tables, and all of that. All of these things they scatter sound in their own way. Right? So these are all things we factor in pretty much. And the amount of porous absorption you need is actually reduced when you bring in diffusive elements. It's very important to keep that in mind. And in fact, I've seen people get away with doing no porous absorption at all, simply because they just diffuse the right amount and, they had the optimal sound energy in the room and all of that. So those are important factors. The other last bit is about the bass trapping. So bass trapping is where you trap the energy of the LF using panel resonators or membranes or perforated resonators, and in many ways. And you are able to then, once you trap the energy of the peak, the null also then evens itself out. So overall, if the amplitude was like this, it then becomes like this. This is what you aim for. So two people then sitting next to each other are feeling the same kind of sound when
a similar sound
to a space. And the boominess of that does not offend you. Sometimes you can't make out what the speech is because something just boomed in the background. So
it improves speech intelligibility as well.
Very much.
So just to end this segment, so I started by saying, is there an ideal room size? And I knew the answer there isn't. Is there a room size that you would absolutely avoid for
That's a good question. That's a very good question. You try and avoid things with exact multiples as dimensions. You try and...
So like a 12 foot by 24 foot by 12 foot would be...
This is a very average thing that we find in a lot of places, because architecturally it's a very nice thing. And but yeah, it tends to, it's still better than having a 12 foot by 12 foot or a 12 or a 24 foot by 24 foot room. So
this is in short. So why is it because of the standing waves?
Yeah, because they all they're exact multiples of each other. So the peaks and nulls will coincide for those frequencies.
So in one place your bass will sound exceptionally high.
Pretty much.
Another place it'll be completely dead.
Yes, they all add
in a square room or a multiple.
Yes, exactly. So one of the things to keep in mind is in a larger room, you tend to have reverberation as the room grows bigger, the balance shifts from bass to reverberation as in terms of the biggest problem you need to solve. So there are sizes of rooms where you can't really experience certain low frequencies at all. So we call it the Schroeder frequency. So below this, the room is very modal, and so the larger the room, the lower the Schroeder frequency. And what that means really is that so in a room which is this large, you can probably experience down to 130 hertz or 160 hertz before it starts sounding very muddy, and you can make out the big differences in what you're hearing. But in a smaller room, let's say a 12-foot by 14-foot room, that Schroeder frequency would be close to 190 or 200 or something of that sort. So then below that many more problem frequencies, then you need to add them. Yeah.
So we've talked a lot about the role of acoustics in home theaters, and I know we've both worked together on a lot of projects where there are dedicated home theaters, but we're seeing more and more, especially in apartments, and even in large homes for that matter, where they have dedicated home theaters. A lot of listening happens in living rooms and family rooms, where even if there is a dedicated room, they may use the home theater once a week, but they put a smaller system in their living room and they use that every day. Obviously, there is less scope to do acoustics in a living area. So what are some of the quick ideas you could give someone, or even in an existing living area, if they want to improve the quality of their sound?
Right.
What are some of the practical things that someone could do?
Okay. So the first thing to understand is that reverberation is a problem only in a closed space. As long as you have open windows, volumes coupling out to the dining or to the utility or to the kitchen or bedrooms, which most living rooms have, or to the foyer, you have shared volumes. So you don't really have that kind of a reverberation issue in homes as such. Also, you always have upholstery, you have divans, you have pillows, bolsters, you have rugs. All of these things tend to take care of a lot of the very basic things. At least speech intelligibility is not a problem. And no one I know really lives with a bad echo. People solve it in some way or the other. We find it naturally irritating, and at least speech has to be reasonably clear. So to that extent, most homes take care of the required acoustics by maybe just bringing in one more sofa or adding a few curtains or throwing a rug or something of that sort. So these things help with the high frequencies. And coupled volumes are the easiest way problems get solved. But then if somebody is a stereophile, like they want to listen to stereo music, close your eyes and focus on the music and all that, then you need to bring in some elements which are helping you in some way without looking like they're acoustical treatment. So what most of the projects where we get brought in, the unwritten, unspoken brief is we want the acoustics, but we don't want to see it. So I get that, okay? I mean, most of the ugly foams and all of these things we see, it's not something it gives you such an unnatural feeling, And we're all moving towards natural finishes now as wellness and all these other factors have become important. So one of the things to keep in mind is that a lot of foliage can help. It helps to balance the reverberation to a certain extent.
So like we have planters and plants.
Yeah, to a good extent. So compared to bare walls, that's a great thing. I'm not saying that will solve a problem for you, because obviously the extent of problem you have needs to be measured and understood. But in general, if you bring in plants, it can never make it worse. It'll always make it better.
So what about my favorite element, the bookshelf? And yours, I know.
Oh, yes.
What does the bookshelf do?
I mean, the amount of real estate my bookshelves are occupying in Malaysia.
So what does the bookshelf do for a space acoustically?
The good thing about a bookshelf is that usually books are never full height spaced in a shelf, right? So there's always space above that. So it offers a natural scattering element to you. So if you're slightly innovative, you can pad the back of the bookshelf with some porous absorption, and that will give you at least 20-30% of absorption that you need in a room. And an example of this is a project we did, which was a slightly larger scale project. It's a clubhouse called Loft 38, and
in Indranagar.
In Indranagar, that's the space. And there you have the ceiling goes up to 40 feet at the center, tapers off to about 36 feet, and then flattens out over the mezzanine floors. But the central volume is all, empty. And the architect was very clear that he didn't want to see any treatment on the walls. So there was some wall paneling that I pleaded and groveled and got for the ground, for the dance floor. So the dance floor is mosaic. The walls are all brick, and there's brick and glass. These are the only two options I have. So we treated the mezzanine floors. So they are all treated. They have wooden panels, but everything is perforated. Even where they wanted to see corrugated sheet metal, we had those perforated and took care of the reverberation there. But the central, the main wall at the back, as soon as you enter, it's this feature wall, is basically lots of logs placed next to each other. So that entire wall looks like a huge barn, so that's the feeling.
But it acts like a diffuser.
So they wanted it to look like a warehouse, but not sound like one. And I studied in Manchester, which was the textile capital of the world at one point, and I know what abandoned warehouses sound like as a first-person experience. So what we did was, we said, before you nail the ply, you add a roll of fuzz behind it, and then you nail the ply. So in the interstitial spaces, we got 20% absorption over a 40-foot high wall.
So that really helped.
Yeah, so we needed I get a lot of work from that architect, because he says she will. Because I think their main job is to protect their design,
the aesthetic design,
from us consultants. We're all trying to poke a hole in that design.
So that was going to be one of my questions, because we face this all the time, right? Where someone, this sort of tension between the aesthetic design that is desired by the architect and or the client, and what we think sounds best from a sound perspective. If someone honestly asked me, would you recommend a tower speaker versus an in-wall speaker? I would say for sound, a tower speaker, because nothing can replace, for me, in a home theater, you can add subwoofers, you can do all of that, but nothing can replace that cabinet volume a tower speaker gives you, and nothing can replace it for music.
Yeah, that fullness is just not
is missing. But then there are aesthetic concerns where people say, we don't want to see speakers, we don't want big boxes. So how do you handle that tension between aesthetic design and the importance of what you do, which is to bring sound alive
in a space? Right. So I think as far as the sound is concerned, we gauge where they lie on that spectrum of how important sound is to them. So is it just the SPL levels they are concerned about, or do they really care about how the mids are sounding? Can they even tell? So, and it's okay not to be able to tell. Like, for instance, I have a problem with colors. I mean, I'm always 2 shades off when I choose a pair of leggings, unless I have the reference piece and it looks different in white light, it looks different in yellow light. I grew up studying 12 colors. So there's a whole spectrum, and there's place for everyone under the sun, and we have no one to judge them for that. So if somebody he just wants a big movie experience and they're not big on sound, they're big on movies. So then you give them the sound, you just give them the SPL levels they're looking for. They're not really into the nuances of it. There are people who are really into the nuances of it. So there you pull out all stops, tell them what's really good, give them auditions. And ultimately, as far as the audio system is concerned, I always tell them to audition, because it's an irrational decision. You have to fall in love with the sound of something and say, this is what I want. That it cannot be, somebody said this speaker is good and I went and bought it. It's not, you're not buying a mixer or a toaster.
It's personal. You always say that. Sound is personal.
Exactly. Sound is very personal. So we don't get into, if we feel that they could use our inputs, we talk about it. But usually we are brought in like the Indian police after it's all done and it's not something good. So 60% of our work is retrofit.
But clients who are very interested in understanding the nuances, do they, and an architect may have an aesthetic intent for the space, which will not, if a client is very particular, it may require more acoustic elements. So do you often find that you and the client push back on the architect and say, hey, no, we need to do this? Or
what we do is, we nobody ever won pushing back an architect. So
no, when I say push back, it's always a negotiation, right? Where we say that, can you redesign this element, incorporate